We were never told the truth about what the words clean and unclean really meant in the Bible. They taught us it was all about animals, food, or hygiene. But the ancient texts say something very different. It's not about the body, it's about power. About who gets to stay inside the system, and who gets cast out. Like this video and subscribe, because today, we'll touch a topic even theologians were afraid to face. Deep within the Torah, in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the word clean was never just ritual. It was political. When a priest declared someone clean, that person gained the right to live among the people, to enter the sanctuary, to touch the sacred. But when declared unclean, they became an outcast. Cut off from the temple, from society, from God himself. And here lies the secret: in the ancient world, purity was a form of control. It decided who was worthy, and who was dangerous to the order. Now bring that same system into the 21st century, and everything looks painfully familiar. Only now, instead of the priest, we have the bureaucrat, or the algorithm. Instead of the label unclean, a status in a database. Instead of exile from the camp, there's censorship, deplatforming, and loss of access to the system. The archives tell a different story. Those old purity laws weren't really about animals or objects, they were about separation and control. Those who obeyed remained among the chosen. Those who broke the rule became a threat to the structure. It was not just a spiritual category, it was a political instrument. And today, it's back. Look around. The world has once again divided people into the clean and the unclean. There are voices that are allowed, and voices that are forbidden. Thoughts that are called holy, and words that are branded toxic. There are those who may enter the sanctuary of the system, and those who are simply erased. This is not a new era. It's a repetition of an old prophecy. They tell us, it's just cancel culture. Just moral progress. But no, this is the new ritual of purification. Global. Digital. Systemic. And when you disagree with the dogma, you become unclean. Remember Leviticus, the leper cast out of the camp? Today it's called misinformation or violating community policy. Same principle: separate the infected, cleanse society. The Bible described it thousands of years ago. But back then it wasn't about skin, it was about spiritual loyalty. The prophets warned, when purity becomes a weapon, a new kind of slavery begins. Because a system that decides who is pure becomes a god. And a god made by humans always demands sacrifice. The real reason was never written in the textbooks. When Jesus touched the unclean, the lepers, the women, the Samaritans, he wasn't breaking ritual. He was breaking a system. Because purity meant power. You were either inside, or outside. And Christ tore down that wall. But humanity built it back again, this time with concrete, code, and protocols. Today, words like access, verification, and identity confirmation sound almost biblical. Doesn't it feel the same? Once, you could enter the temple only if you were clean. Now you can enter a plane, a bank, or a government portal only if you are verified. The form changed. The principle remained: control through ritual. What if we are living in the very days the prophets foresaw? When spiritual categories return in technological form. When purification becomes a sanction, and uncleanliness becomes a ban? Just watch the news. Laws defining proper values. Lists of those who violated social order. Companies designing ethical algorithms. It's not just technology, it's a new altar. And on it, humanity once again burns its freedom in the name of safety and purity. The official statements are just a veil. They tell us it's about morality. But behind it lies a struggle for control over the conscience itself. What the priest once declared at the temple gate, today the system declares in code, deciding what is holy and what is filth. the ancient rabbis said, whoever defines impurity rules the world. And now, it's not prophets who do it, it's corporations. Those who control information decide what is truth, and what is sin. Those who own the databases decide who is clean, and who is infected with the wrong thought. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. As once the temple priests ruled through ritual, today the elites rule through moral code, a code that changes whenever it suits them. We think sin and purity are spiritual words. But now they've become legal ones. In some countries, there are already blacklists, disinformation registries, and ethical certificates. These are not reports, they are a new covenant. Not divine, but digital. If you feel that the truth lies deeper than it seems, give this video a like. And subscribe, because in the next episode, we'll go even deeper. The true meaning of clean in Scripture was never about ritual. It was about spiritual identity. And that is what they're trying to rewrite. Because when people forget that purity is a matter of the heart, they can be given any definition from above. And that is the most dangerous deception. When the system teaches you that being clean means being obedient, you're no longer a person. You're a function. When you're forced to cleanse yourself not from sin, but from thought, you're no longer a believer. You're a resource. And that's exactly what's happening now. The prophets said, when the holy becomes a commodity, the temple will fall. Look around. The system that calls itself moral now sells purity in exchange for loyalty. Churches that once fought for truth now stay silent, to keep their status. And those who speak, become outcasts. This is the very sign John spoke of. When truth is replaced by ritual, the world enters its final purification, not from sin, but from truth. I'm not saying this is the end. But it feels like the script has already begun. And we are not the audience. We are the actors. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Do you see the same signs in this prophecy that I do? We were told the biblical law was about morality. But in the ancient world, morality and power were one. The law didn't just define what was right, it decided who had the right to live. And those who controlled the law, controlled the people. In the book of Leviticus it says, the priest must examine, cleanse, and decide, are you clean or unclean? It looked like a sacred ritual. But in truth, it was the first mechanism for controlling the conscience. You could be righteous in heart, yet if the system declared you unclean, you ceased to exist. Your voice lost its meaning. Your presence became a threat. Today, the same logic rules again. Only now the priests wear suits, or hide behind code. Bureaucrats, committees, algorithms, they decide which thoughts are pure and which are extreme. Which words are acceptable, and which violate community rules. Which news is verified, and which is dangerous. World leaders have long known, the biblical model of purity was never only spiritual. It was an architecture of power built on fear of losing status. That's why the ancient priests feared questions, because every question could break the system. Like this video and subscribe, because next time we'll uncover how spiritual purity became the access code to the modern temple, the digital world. The priest of the Old Testament was not just a man at the altar, he was an inspector of loyalty. He decided who could remain among the people, and who was defiled. He examined not only the body but the soul. And every decision carried political weight. Whoever disobeyed became an outcast. And here lies the truth they were afraid to tell. The law was created not only for holiness, but for discipline. Not only for God, but for power. Later, the prophets said God desired not sacrifice, but mercy. Yet the system couldn't accept that. Because the heart cannot be controlled, but the law can. And so the law became the instrument of control. Today, we see the same pattern. When global institutions decide what is proper language, acceptable belief, ethical standard, that's the new Leviticus. Only now, it carries a digital seal. When you're forced to sign a corporate values agreement to keep your job, that's a modern ritual of purification. When your account is suspended for violating community norms, that's exile from the camp. When an algorithm scores your loyalty, that's confession without God. We were taught this as progress. But the ancient texts say otherwise. Every time a person allows the system to define what is clean and what is not, they surrender a piece of their soul. That's what destroyed the empires of the past. Assyria defined purity by blood. Rome, by citizenship. The medieval church, by dogma. And today's world, by algorithm. Everything they told us about freedom was a lie. The freedom the modern world sells is the freedom to be pure by its own rules. True freedom is the right to be unclean before the world, yet clean before God. Here lies the great paradox. When Jesus broke the Sabbath, touched the leper, spoke to the Samaritan, he didn't break the law. He showed that the law is not God. And that's what those standing by the temple feared the most. Because if people realize purity needs no permission, the entire pyramid of power collapses. Ancient rabbinic commentaries reveal this clearly. The word unclean was often used against political opponents. Anyone who questioned the priests could be branded defiled. It wasn't about sin, it was about silence. Not about faith, but control. And the same happens today. The modern world keeps creating new unclean ones, those who speak the forbidden words. It does so under noble banners, combating hate, protecting morals, upholding ethics. Only now, the ritual of purification is called behavior correction. Official statements are just a veil. Behind them lies the same ancient fear, the fear of those who refuse to bow to the system's laws. And that fear breeds new rules, new prohibitions, new rituals. We think we live in the age of human rights. But maybe it's just a new temple, where the priests have traded robes for suits. Those who proclaim morality now decide who may approach the altar of the modern world, economic, media, and spiritual alike. Look at the global forums, the ethical charters, the trust codes. These are the new tablets of the law, written not by God, but by people who believe they know better. And now they impose that law on everyone, under threat of exile, censorship, and loss of access. The prophets warned, the time will come when people will honor the law more than the one who gave it. Perhaps that time has already come. And what if we now live in the age of a new Leviticus, not in a temple, but in the cloud? Where purification is not prayer, but an update to your status. Where confession is filling out a form. Where blessing is a QR code of approval. Then the question becomes simple. Who is your priest now? A man? An algorithm? Or God? If you feel the world is repeating its old patterns, give this video a like. And subscribe, because the next episode will take us deeper into the part they fear the most. The true law they feared was never the law of Leviticus. It was the law of freedom. Written not on stone, but on the heart. A law that no decree, algorithm, or order can erase. And that is why the system hates it. Because this law makes a person free, even in chains. And a free person is the most dangerous enemy of empires. When Jesus said, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath," he shattered the cornerstone of control. From that moment, anyone who listens to conscience becomes uncontrollable. And that is why the world, built on fear, is trying once again to restore the old system, purification through obedience. When that cycle repeats, the end draws near. Because every time the system claims the place of God, history ends the same way. With a fall. We were told that purity is a matter of the soul. But history tells another story. Every great empire defined purity not as holiness, but as obedience. Those who complied were pure. Those who questioned, unclean. And on that foundation, power was built. Babylon began at first. There, purity meant belonging to the temple, to the priesthood, to the state religion. The Babylonian priests decided who could be called a citizen of the gods, and who was a rebel. Those who refused to worship the emperor became impure, enemies of order. Exile from the temple wasn't just spiritual separation. It was social death. Without purity, a person lost the right to trade, to live, to breathe among others. Centuries passed, and Rome perfected the system. Its emperors understood, if a person fears being unclean, you no longer need to punish them. They punished themselves. Rome created a cult of imperial purity. Loyalty to the emperor became the new holiness. Those who rejected the divinity of Caesar were branded defiled. They weren't just executed, they were erased from memory, as if they had never existed. And here lies the truth we forgot. Then, as now, purity was a tool of political sterilization. Society was cleansed of dangerous ideas. Not bodies, but words. Not sins, but convictions. The shadows of those empires rise again. Look around. Today, purity has new names, ethical standards, social responsibility, correctness. It sounds noble, but the essence is the same. It is a filter deciding who gets to speak. Who remains inside the temple, meaning, the public sphere. And who is cast out beyond the borders of the civilized community. Every empire shared one symbol, the altar. Babylon burned those who refused to bow. Rome crucified those who denied its gods. Today, the world does the same, only the flames are digital. The victims don't burn, they disappear from timelines. Their profiles deleted. Their names erased from search results. The new sacrifices, of the new purity. The real reason was never written in the textbooks. Empires never wanted righteousness, they wanted uniformity. Because difference is dangerous to control. And that is why purity became the code of submission. When Rome fell, the idea of purity didn't die, it simply changed its robe. The medieval church declared heretics, witches, and thinkers unclean. Anything that defied the dogma was called a threat to holiness. And so was born the first official mechanism of censorship, the Inquisition. Once again, the same words returned, cleansing, correction, atonement. But here is the greatest irony, the same principles are alive today, under different banners. We no longer burn heretics, we cancel them. We no longer pronounce anathema, we just mark them in violation of policy. And we call it humane. Official statements are just a veil. Behind the words inclusivity and tolerance hides a new ritual of purification. Those who reject the dogma are infected. Those who question the system are extremists. Those who speak of faith are fanatics. The new Rome built not walls, but algorithms. And now, it purifies not bodies, but minds. When Babylon sought to erase the identity of Israel, it didn't just burn Jerusalem. It renamed the captives, changed their language, altered their food. It blurred the line between the holy and the profane. And now, look at the modern world. Education systems, media, advertising, all serve the same purpose. To rewrite identity, erase the boundaries, and teach that purity means approval. The prophets warned of this long ago. They said, abomination will stand in the holy place. When the temple becomes an instrument of politics, the end always begins. Because holiness that serves the system is no longer holy. So it was in Babylon. So it was in Rome. And so it is today. Empires don't fall by the sword. They fall by lies, lies disguised as truth. By purity used as camouflage for control. Like this video and subscribe if you feel the truth runs deeper than they show. Because in the next episode, we'll lift the next veil, where purity no longer concerns ideas, but the body itself. We'll uncover why ancient laws about food, blood, and flesh speak directly to our world today. Because every empire begins with laws about the body and ends with laws about the soul. They told us that blood is only biology, just a fluid that carries oxygen. But from the very first pages of Scripture, blood is not a liquid, it is a code, a sign of covenant, a symbol of life itself, untouchable without the permission of God. The blood is the life, says the book of Deuteronomy. And that is why it could not be consumed, spilled without cause, or stored. To touch blood was to touch life. And life belongs only to the Creator. Like this video and subscribe, because what we uncover today is the oldest secret of power the modern world has tried to hide. When the high priest entered the Holy of Holies, he sprinkled the Ark of the Covenant with the blood of a sacrificial lamb. It wasn't cruelty, it was a contract. Life in exchange for life. Blood symbolized cleansing, renewal, and the passing of blessing. That is why it became the first currency of the world. But over time, that symbol was twisted. Humanity learned a dark lesson. Whoever controls the blood, controls life. And sacrifice stopped being sacred, it became a resource. Babylon poured blood on the altar of its gods, to gain power. Rome spilled it on the arenas, to keep its people obedient. Empires have always fed on blood. They just changed the names: war, peacekeeping, progress. Nothing has changed. Blood is still the world's main currency. Only now it's measured not in liters, but in data. Donor networks, DNA banks, identification programs. All new altars of the system. Each of us gives a sample, willingly or not. And most don't realize they give more than biomaterial. They give a fragment of the code of life. The real reason never reached the textbooks. When scientists in the 20th century decoded DNA, they opened more than the doors of science, they opened the gates of power. Because now, life could be copied, modified, and owned. Blood ceased to be sacred, it became a patent. In the ancient world, an emperor demanded an oath in blood. Today, corporations demand your consent to process biometric data. The same ritual, only the language has changed. And now, to be pure, you must give a piece of yourself. Literally. Watch how the world turns blood into merchandise. Donation programs become markets. Genetic companies buy the data of millions. Every drop added to the database, a fragment of global control. The prophets warned long ago. For the life is in the blood, and he who defiles it defiles the earth. When humanity treats blood as a resource, the earth answers with war. Every empire that drank the blood of nations drowned in its own. And now we see it again. Wars called peace operations. Victims justified by security. Technologies promising healing, yet leading to control. The world is building a new ark, not God's, but man's. Filled with the blood of laboratories and battlefields. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. As the priests of Babylon once mixed blood with wine in their temples. Today scientists mix DNA with machines, creating the new humanity. Then they called it deification. Now they call it evolution. But the result is the same, man trying to become God. And here lies the paradox. The blood that once purified, now infects. Because now it is shed not for redemption, but for experiment. Not for forgiveness, but for power. The world keeps offering sacrifices, without realizing it. In wars. In labs. In clinics where the body is treated as material. And behind it all lies the same belief. Control over life through control over blood. Ancient records reveal a strange detail. In Babylon, priests believed that strength flowed through blood. Today, scientists say the same, through DNA. Information is passed, heritage is designed, destiny is written. And so the ancient idea lives on. Whoever owns the blood, owns the future. The official statements are just a veil. Under the slogan of health protection, databases are built. Under humanitarian aid, samples are collected. Under innovation, a new form of slavery is born. Biological slavery. We live in a world where blood has a price again. Not spiritual, but market. And that's why the sanctity of life has lost its meaning. Because when life can be priced, it can be bought. The prophets warned. The earth shall pour out her blood, and she shall find no peace. Perhaps that is already happening. Because the more blood is spilled, on the field, in the lab, in the hospital, the faster the spirit fades. And when that cycle repeats, the end draws near. Because God never gave humanity the right to own blood. Only the duty, to guard it as the sign of life. And that is why the true battle today is not for land, not for wealth, but for the meaning of blood. For whoever defines its meaning, defines the future. Whether it will remain the sign of covenant, or become the mark of ownership. They told us that the laws of clean and unclean food were just about diet. That God was concerned with hygiene. That pigs, camels, and fish without scales were simply symbols of health. But the ancient texts say something very different. Those laws were never about the stomach. They were about identity, about the boundary between the sacred and the distorted. Because in biblical times, the body was not just flesh. It was a temple. And every ritual of cleansing, every restriction, every sacrifice was a reminder, you do not own your body. You guard it. That's why unclean never meant infected, it meant defiled. It meant crossing the line between what is holy and what is merely material. Like this video and subscribe, because what we are about to uncover is the most dangerous truth for the modern world. When the people of Israel left Egypt, they didn't just escape slavery. They escaped a system where the body belonged to the state. Egypt decided what to eat, how to dress, how to bury the dead. Even death was under control. So God gave the laws of the clean and the unclean, to restore human dignity. To say, your body does not belong to Pharaoh. But history repeats. Today, once again, a culture is forming where the body becomes property. Now it's called scientific progress, bioethics, genetic innovation. We are told the body can be edited like code. Genes rewritten, DNA mixed, new beings created. The line between the sacred and the altered is blurring again. In the ancient world, forbidden bodies were seen as carriers of impurity. Today, it is the very idea of the sacred that is forbidden. You can change gender, create embryos in labs, merge human and machine. And they will call you brave. But if you say the body has divine meaning, they will call you a fanatic. Everything has flipped. Holiness became guilt. Defilement became heroism. And that is no accident. The shadows of the old empires rise again. Just as the priests of Babylon once sacrificed children to their gods, today a new generation is being offered up. In laboratories and on medical altars. Back then, they called it a ritual of purification. Now they call it an experiment. But the essence is the same. Control the body, and you control the soul. The real reason never made it into textbooks. When power takes control of the body, it takes control of the conscience. Because conscience lives in the body, in breath, in blood, in the heart. And if you can convince a person that their body has no spiritual meaning, You can make them do anything. Look at the world today. Nations pass laws on reproductive rights, body choice, biometric identity. But beneath every law lies the same question. Who owns the body? God, or the system? When the Apostle Paul wrote, "Your bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit," he wasn't only speaking about morality. He was speaking about ownership. He meant, the body is sacred territory, it cannot be privatized. But today, that territory is for sale. Biotech corporations patent genomes, cells, even blood. The human body has become a resource. A new Babylon, built not from stone, but from bone. The symbol of the pig, once a mark of impurity, has returned. In ancient times, it was considered a hybrid creature, living among humans, yet feeding like a beast. And today, the world has become that creature. Civilized on the outside, predatory within. We no longer feed our stomachs with the unclean, we feed our spirits. We consume impurity not through the mouth, but through the screen. They told us that rituals of cleansing were superstition. But look around. We created new rituals. Creams. Fitness. Surgery. Filters. A new liturgy of perfection. The body has become a god. And this god demands worship. Daily. Without question. The prophets warned, when man places the body on the throne, the spirit will fall. And here we are. Technology promises immortality. Medicine promises eternal youth. Corporations promise the perfect body. But there is always a price. And the price is the soul. The official statements are just a veil. Behind the words scientific breakthrough hides a new cult of flesh. Laboratories have become temples. Scientists, the new priests. And the sacrifices remain the same. Humans who allow their bodies to be experimented upon, believing it is progress. But when this cycle repeats, the end draws near. Because history remembers. No empire that touched the line between life and holiness ever survived. Babylon fell. Rome decayed from within. And now the world stands again at that same edge. We no longer see the difference between sacred and profane. We replaced ritual with software updates. Prayer with therapy. Confession with gene editing. But the body was never about technology. It was about covenant. And whoever breaks that covenant becomes part of the ancient curse. Because the image of God lives within the body. And once it's rewritten, everything ends. They told us the temple was a place. That God lived in stone, in walls, in golden sanctuaries. But the scriptures say something else. A temple is not a building, it is a system. And every time humanity builds that system without God, the temple becomes a trap. In ancient times, you could enter the temple only if you were clean. Priests stood at the gates, checking. Have you purified yourself? Have you brought the offering? Do you have the right to touch the holy? And if you didn't meet the requirements, the doors closed. You were left outside, among the unclean. Among the outcasts. Today, those doors stand before us again. Only now, they are digital. To enter, you don't bring a sacrifice, you enter a code. No priest decides who is clean, the system does. And that is why the new temple seems perfect. No idols, no blood, no visible sacrifices. Yet inside, it follows the same ancient logic. Officially, they call it verification, identification, access control. But behind those words hides a new religion. The religion of access. The world has become a sanctuary, where everyone must perform a ritual of confirmation to belong. Without the code, you are unclean. You are denied entry to the temple of economy, the temple of medicine, the temple of communication. You remain outside the gates. The ancient veil that once separated the holy from the profane is now called a firewall. The Holy of Holies is a database. The priest is an algorithm. And the altar is your profile. Receiving your daily actions as offerings to the system. The true reason behind this was never written in textbooks. The old empires built towers to the heavens to control the sky. The modern world does the same. Only now it builds in the cloud. It is no longer the Tower of Babel made of stone, but a digital one. And each of us is a brick. We willingly give our data, our words, our thoughts. We tell the system who we are, what we love, what we believe. And the system records everything. Just as the ancient priest once wrote names in the book of life. Now the server writes our profiles into the digital register. Every action, every click, every search, becomes a confession. The prophets once warned. A time will come when every word will testify against you. We live in that time. Because everything you say is stored. Everything you search is analyzed. Your life is no longer a journey, it is a file. The shadows of the old empires rise again. As priests once watched the purity of rituals, today algorithms watch the purity of behavior. They decide what you can see, what you can say, what you can even think. A new form of censorship, disguised as comfort. We no longer pray in temples, we log in. We no longer offer sacrifices, we click accept terms. Everything feels voluntary. But wasn't it the same before? In the ancient world, no one forced worship of the emperor. You simply couldn't live without it. It is happening again. You may reject the system. But then you lose everything: job, access, voice. You may refuse the sacred QR code. But then you cease to exist. The system does not punish, it erases. It does not kill, it forgets. And that is the most terrifying exile. To be deleted from memory itself. Official statements are just a veil. They tell us it's convenience, security, progress. But behind each word hides a new cult. The cult of total knowledge. Because whoever knows everything about you has power over your soul. In the past, people offered sacrifices, so their names would be written in the book of life. Today, we update our profiles, so we won't be deleted from the digital registry. Once, priests washed their hands before entering the temple. Now we cleanse our browsing history. It all seems like small things. But every small thing is part of a new ritual. Its principle is simple. You may live if the system declares you pure. And when that repeats, the end draws near. Because history shows. Every temple built on fear becomes a prison. And every god made by man eventually demands human souls. The modern temple is not made of stone. Not of words, not of prayers. It is built of data. And at its heart, there is no altar, but a server. Cold, silent, precise. And before it, the whole world bows down. They told us we've become civilized. That the dark days of the Inquisition are long gone. That no one is burned for their faith anymore. No one judged for their words. No one exiled for their beliefs. But the truth is different. We've simply learned to burn in silence. Without fire. Without smoke. In the bonfire of information. Today the world has built a new cult. The cult of the purified. Those who speak correctly. Think correctly. Live correctly. They receive digital certificates of virtue. They are allowed into the systems. The banks. The sacred space of public speech. The others are erased. Not punished. Not imprisoned. Just deleted. As if they never existed. Once, purity was defined through rituals. Now, through algorithms. Every word, every click, every search is a test of loyalty. Pass it, you are clean. Fail, you become toxic, suspect, extremist. The system needs no court, the verdict is machine-made. And you agree, because it's easier that way. The prophets warned. A time will come when evil will be called good, and good will be called evil. We live in that time. Morality is no longer shaped by God, but by corporations, governments, and media. They define what is ethical, progressive, pure. And those who disagree become dangerous. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. Just as priests once checked whether you brought the right offering, today they check your code, your certificate, your opinion. Once the priests washed their hands to separate from the unclean. Now people block one another to stay pure. And they call it kindness. Official statements are just a veil. Behind slogans of unity and peace, a new caste system is being built. Those who have been cleansed, inside. Those who have not, outside. Everything seems fair. Everything looks moral. And no one notices. That morality has once again become a passport. The truth behind it never made it into textbooks. Because the system doesn't need slaves. It needs the willingly purified. Those who choose to be correct. Those who censor themselves, just to keep their status of purity. Those who betray truth, just to protect their reputation. The world has turned obedience into virtue, and called it ethics. Now the fear of being impure is stronger than the love of truth. And that is the new kind of slavery. The slavery of purity. We see it everywhere. In social networks, where people are afraid to speak honestly. In corporations, where the vision of values is mandatory. In schools, where children are taught to stay silent, so they won't offend anyone. In churches, where pastors fear to preach about sin. And all of them say, we just want peace. But peace built on fear is only a pause before war. History shows, when a society begins to purge the impure, blood always follows. Because behind every purification stands destruction. First of reputation, then of the person, then of the nation. Once, to be accepted, you had to bring a sacrifice. Today, an apology. For your past, your words, your ancestors. And that too has become a ritual. A ritual of self-humiliation. The system calls healing. It doesn't cleanse, it breaks. A person loses their self to fit the standard. In the ancient world, white garments symbolized holiness. Now, they mean certification. Then, they reflected a pure heart. Now, a spotless public image. If there's a stain, you're erased. It no longer matters what is true. Only that the image stays clean. We live in a world of mirrors. Thousands of eyes watching, judging, scoring. Everyone afraid to look dirty. And so everyone wears masks. Society has become a vast confessional, without a priest. You confess not to God, but to the crowd. You ask forgiveness not for sin, but for difference. And when this repeats, the end draws near. Because no civilization can survive. When truth becomes dangerous, purity without mercy becomes poison. And that poison now flows through the veins of the world. We see it in language, in law, in art. Everywhere the real is replaced by the sterile. And if nothing changes, one day the society of the purified will awaken. In complete darkness. Without sin. Without truth. Without a soul. The world has declared. The law no longer exists. Everyone decides for themselves. What is truth? What is good? What is evil? Morality has become relative. truth, flexible, faith, a private affair. But when humanity erases the law, the world doesn't become free. It becomes lawless. And that is when the law returns. Not man's law, God's. The ancient books say the law never vanished. Even when people turned away from it, it waited. Because the universe is not built on chaos, but on order. And that order is not political, not legal, not cultural. It is spiritual. It cannot be repealed by decree or rewritten by constitution. You can either accept it, or break yourself against it. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. They all shared one sin. They replaced God's law with their own. Babylon fell to pride. Rome, to power. The modern world, to technology. And the result was always the same. Collapse. Because the law doesn't need belief to function. It simply works. The true reason for this never made it into textbooks. Every system that fights against God forgets the most important truth. He is not a tyrant, he is the boundary. The line that protects man from himself. And when that line is erased, self-destruction begins. We see it everywhere. Laws rewritten to call sin a choice. And holiness, intolerance. Those who speak truth are branded extremists. Those who live by conscience, dangerous. A world without the law drifts like a ship without a compass. And when the storm comes, it loses direction. The prophets said, "A day will come when people will seek the law, and not find it." Perhaps that day has already come. Even in churches we now hear, the main thing is just to be kind. But kindness without law is a shadow without form. True goodness always stands at the boundary that God himself has drawn. And here lies the paradox. The more humanity tries to destroy the divine law, the more it invents its own codes, policies, protocols, standards. Thousands of pages of new commandments. The world that rejected the Decalogue has rewritten it, without God. And now it punishes not sin, but thought. Not evil, but deviation. It is a copy of the law, without love. And every such copy becomes tyranny. Yet somewhere in the silence, among the chaos, there are still those who remember. They do not rise with weapons. They rise with conscience. They are called outdated, dangerous, fanatical. But they are the living boundaries, keeping the world from collapsing entirely. They restore the ancient division between the sacred and the profane. They seek no revolution. They simply refuse to worship the lie. Long ago the prophet Jeremiah said, "I will write my law upon their hearts." It wasn't a metaphor, it was a rescue plan. Because when every outer system fails, only one thing remains, the inner law. The one that doesn't depend on governments, parties, or creeds. The one that whispers within, "Don't do this, it isn't true." Official statements are only a veil. The world speaks of a new ethics. But this new ethics has no soul. It's written not by prophets, but by marketers. Not by apostles, but by reputation advisors. And that's why it cannot save. It can only silence the conscience. When ancient Israel broke the law, it lost the temple. When the modern world broke morality, it lost meaning. And now we stand at the edge, between freedom and chaos. Only the law can separate those two shores. Not the human law, but the one that has always been. The return of the law is not punishment. It is purification. Like water after the storm. Like wind after decay. And those who accept it do not lose freedom. They regain it. And when this repeats, the end comes for those who lie. And the beginning for those who hear the truth. Because in every age, God restores his law. Not to enslave, but to remind. The world does not belong to those who invent the rules, but to those who remember. where they came from. A day will come when all that is hidden will be revealed. When every system that divided people into pure and impure will vanish. And only one question will remain. Whom does God call pure? The world has learned to judge quickly. Now a single word, a single post, a single suspicion, and you are guilty. No one examines the heart. No one listens to truth. It's enough that you don't fit the new moral algorithm. And the system delivers its verdict. Not with blood. Not with chains. But with silence. It was the same long ago. When the Pharisees stood before Christ. They believed themselves pure. They fasted. They prayed. They offered sacrifices. But when the truth itself stood before them, they did not recognize it. Because purity without mercy becomes blindness. And that same blindness rules the world again. Today, millions believe themselves pure. Because they follow the rules. Hold the right opinions. Wear the right labels. But true purity is not outward. It lives in what you do when no one sees. In how you treat your enemy. In how you face injustice. In how you keep your conscience alive when everyone else stays silent. The shadows of the old empires rise again. Those who once judged others now stand judged by history. Those who called others unclean have become the very symbols of evil. For human judgment is brief. But divine judgment is exact. It does not ask which party you serve, which church you attend, or what tribe you belong to. It asks only one question. Who are you when everything else disappears? The truth behind it never made it into textbooks. The world has always feared justice. That cannot be controlled by power. So humanity built its own courts, its own systems, its own definitions of purity. They decided who deserves to live and who does not. And every time man played God, the end was the same. Collapse. The Bible says, the book will be opened. That is not a myth, it is a sentence. For in that book there are no boxes for profession, nation, or belief. Only names, written, or erased. And that will be the final division. Not by status, not by body, not by ideology. But by who remained faithful to the truth. Official declarations are just a veil. The world calls itself humane. Yet acts like Babylon. It creates lists of the pure. Launches audits. Grades citizens for their own good. It doesn't cleanse crimes, it cleanses people. It burns not sin, but character. And believes it is doing good. But the true judgment does not ask about good intentions. It asks, whom did you follow, fear or conscience? For fear always leads to lies. But conscience, to truth, even when it costs your life. When Christ stood before Pilate, humanity was split in two. Some cried, crucify, to protect the system. Others stayed silent, out of fear. But a few remained faithful. Even when everything lost meaning. And they became the seed of a new world. History repeats itself. Those who stay silent for safety will one day realize they've lost their souls. But those who stayed true, even if erased, will remain written. Not in a database, but in the book. When this repeats, the end draws near. For judgment is not punishment, it is cleansing. The moment when truth no longer needs proof. When masks fall. When lies burn away. When only what is real remains. And then it will be revealed. The pure were not the ones who appeared holy, but those who kept their humanity. In a world that was losing it. And the impure were not the cursed, but the unbroken. Those the system could not silence. Because God does not look at the face. He looks into the heart. And he asks only one thing. Was it still alive? When the whole world became digital. Silence comes. Not human silence, but cosmic. The kind that descends after the storm. When there are no winners. No guilty ones. Only the stillness between two worlds. The old one, burned to ashes. And the new one, not yet born. The ancient prophets said, a day will come when all voices will fall silent. And every soul will hear the whisper of truth. That day has come. Because now it no longer matters who was called clean. And who was called unclean. Who had access, and who was cast out. There is only one question left. Did the soul survive? All empires have fallen. All systems that tried to define holiness have crumbled to dust. Every ideology that promised order has turned to ashes. And yet, the world still exists. Because ashes are not the end. They are the ground. And from that ground, life begins again. We have walked through Babylon and Rome. Through laboratories, through networks. Through temples made of steel and servers. We saw the body turned into code. The blood turned into currency. The conscience, rewritten as an algorithm. We heard the voices of the priests of a new age. Preaching purity without God. And we watched them perish by their own laws. And now, only silence remains. Because when everything has been spoken, when every verdict has been declared, God speaks without words. And that is the most terrifying sound. For those who never learn to listen. The real reason for all this will never make the news. Because truth does not live in headlines. It hides within. Where a person decides whether to stand or fall. To keep or betray. To remain faithful. Even when the world calls it madness. We have grown addicted to noise. To endless chatter. To headlines, to politics, to distraction. But when silence comes, it reveals everything. No filters. No roles. No audience. And then it becomes clear. What is left, after all? The shadows of the old empires no longer rise from the earth. In their place stand new people, those who remember. Not saints. Not heroes. Just the ones who refuse to betray. They are few. But they are the beginning. Because God always starts over. With those who kept the truth alive. In the silence. Official statements are just noise. They will try to explain what happened. They will write stories, make films, build museums. But no one will explain the silence. Because silence is the moment. When the world stands before the judge. And even justification sounds like guilt. And yet, in that silence, there is beauty. Because silence is what allows a new world to be born. Not perfect. Not pure. But real. A world where purity is the state of the heart. Where law is not fear, but memory. Where the temple is not a server, but a human being. When this repeats, it is not the end. It is the beginning. Because God does not end history. He cleanses it. And after the fire, after the fall, after the silence, He speaks one word. Live. And in that moment, the world breathes again. No systems. No empires. No idols. Only a human and God. No intermediaries. No boundaries. No fear. And now I ask you, what do you think? Is this silence the end? Or the first breath of a new world? If you noticed inaccuracies or technical flaws, please forgive them. This voiceover was created with artificial intelligence. And some details may have been distorted. Leave a comment below. Your feedback will help make the next revelations even clearer, stronger, and closer to the truth.